It's a
I'm
little
just
bit
I'm just
deeper.
hitting the button there
Oh
just
no,
to
you're totally
yeah.
fine. All
Yeah,
right.
it's like it's a little bit more than just like, hey, let's go like play in the dirt.
Yeah, no, I mean, like it has the same capacity to some in some like level or whatever. Like this is our version of playing as an adult, like playing around with things that we're passionate about. But yeah, it's a slightly different. Like um, when you meet a random person as an adult and spend some time with them and connect with them, most people don't necessarily jump directly to being friends, though you could, depending on your attitude about it. But
It
yeah,
just
it's
takes so
fun.
much more effort as an adult. Like you really have
I
to
think
like create space and time for it. Whereas
yeah,
as a kid, it just happens like so naturally.
I think it happens naturally for a couple of reasons, but one of which is kids have a like built-in play dates, right? Like it's a normal thing. It would be
Mm,
way weirder if I met somebody like randomly at a grocery store and I hit it off, or like you and I, right? Say we met in some type of capacity that was an off chance, like not a scheduled meeting. Like,
mhm.
and then I turned to you and I was like, "Hey, would you like to schedule a play date?" That would be a really weird thing for an adult to say to another adult. It's not a
Yeah.
weird thing for kids to say. And like, if you don't have habitual like pockets built in, it's easy for it to go to by the wayside. But one of the things that really makes life like have the depth is making those connections. And the
Mm,
more you can make it over time, and it doesn't have to be somebody who agrees with you, but the ability to have space for their thought
mm,
without having to feel like you have to pull it into yourself, like those differences, whether you agree or disagree, I feel like that allows for so much more depth and possibility of introspection and growth within a person. So it's kind of sad in a way, but also a little creepy if you were to walk up to somebody
yeah.
and be like, "Hey, you want to be friends? Let's do a play date."
Although, like, if some weirdo like came up to me and I got a good vibe off it, like, yeah, whatever. Like, I'm open to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say generally speaking, I'm much more like that with females. If a dude walked up to me, even if
Yeah.
he had good vibes, I would probably be like, "Thank you, but no."
Yeah. It's like, what are your real intentions?
When you said when like because in the past, like I used to have guy friends, right? And I thought it was a thing. And I think like maybe it can be with some unique, amazing individuals. But my experience, people I thought I had friendships with that were males, turned out that I didn't have friendships with.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and they were having conversations behind closed doors that would never have happened in a world where we were friends, kind
Right.
of thing. Yeah. And I don't mean like girl conversations, like where they're like talking smack behind you. It's like the awkward sexual stuff that I'm like,
Yeah.
no. But
Yeah. Crossing
so
the line.
yeah, well, crossing the line and like, it's not a part of like, there's a difference between me being able to say, man, I love how dark and deep your eyes are, right? Like it gives so much like integrity and truth. Like that's a compliment about your person, right? That's different than being like any number of turning you into a sexual object
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
thing. And so I have a like tentative, um, theoretical fairy tale understanding at this point of males having friendships with males. That's kind of how I view it. I'm like, it could be a thing. Like there totally could be mermaids and like
Yeah.
unicorns. That could be a thing someplace. I just haven't come across it.
Fair enough.
Yeah. I love the
Cool.
idea of it, but and I once was a true believer until my truth was squashed in front of me.
Mm.
But
One of those stories, eh, where it's like yeah.
yeah, no, most definitely.
Yeah.
Where life hits the road and you realize the the story you thought was happening was not the same. You weren't on the same path.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, and it's sad because like you did think like, you thought you were on the same wavelength as someone and then
Yeah.
it just drops off and you're like, "Oh, okay." Like it does hurt as well.
Yeah. No, I think it's a part of the process. I think that's one of the harder things about I've got four kids, like I said before, but with teaching my kids how to like connect with people, offer people understanding and grace, but at the same time like um keep their own safety.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
identifying this person might be a very good playmate, but not necessarily a very good friend. And knowing the difference between that, but it's also hard to teach, like, okay, we need to walk into this expecting the like these patterns you've seen. It's a whole, it's not a fun process. It's a needed process, but not a fun process.
Yeah, you've got your hands full there for sure, especially with 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they're wonderful though. They're like, I guess the best way to put it is they have not learned the bad coping mechanisms that I know. And so I look to them for like something to aspire to almost, if that makes sense.
That's beautiful. And what's their ages?
Yeah. So my oldest is 9. My next is 6. My next is about to turn 5 on Sunday. And then my
Cool.
youngest is 3.
Okay.
Yeah. So the
I'll just make a note
bottom
of that.
3 are all 20 months apart. So they're all like tight.
Yeah, wow, quick.
Yeah. And then, but my first one was, she's got a 3-year plus gap between her and but it's another one of those. If you ever hear somebody who tells you that, you can't have kids because of PCOS, don't believe them. It's not always true.
Living proof.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it was one of those things where like they told me I could never have kids. And so because of my complicated background, I never wanted to have kids. But my spouse did. And so the compromise that isn't a compromise, because there's no compromise on kids, was simply like,
Yeah.
we'll just let it be since the doctor said that I couldn't happen. But if after letting it be for 3 years, then we'll do something permanent to make sure it doesn't be. And
Right.
I got pregnant 2 months before the end of the 3rd year.
Ooh.
So
Wow. You probably thought you were in the clear. You were like,
I
oh.
did. I did think I was in the clear. And it
Yeah.
was it took me a little bit to get okay with it, to be honest.
Yeah. For
But I'm
sure.
really glad
Yeah.
now. They're amazing and wonderful, and I'm really glad they're here. Endless
Yeah.
surprise at work, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. All right. Well, should we get started?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, cool. So I've literally got 2 questions written down. I know this is just going to flow and be like so fucking awesome. So I've got a bit of an intro here. So I might just start with that and then we'll
Yeah,
just roll on into it.
perfect.
Cool. Okay. And then quickly as well, the pronunciation of your name.
Yeah, sure. Rachel Abbey.
Abby. Okay. That's what I thought. I mean,
Yeah,
pretty
no,
self-explanatory, but
it is, but like it's like the it's a very long story, but the essential end of it is my parents needed a biblical middle name, and so they chose Abigail, but it was too long, so they chose just the first half of it. So it's
okay.
Abigail if you cut off the Gale.
Right. Okay. Got it. Okay. Rachel Abby. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Rachel Abbey is the star of the show today. I actually found her while scrolling Instagram. She was talking about emotional regulation. Absolutely loved your energy, loved what you had to say and how you said it. And I knew right away I wanted to bring you on the show. So Rachel's been on her own extensive healing journey post-trauma and is now a single mama with so much value to share and authenticity in how she shares it. So we are going to talk today about the real raw process and how it actually looks and feels. Nervous system regulation, emotional regulation, mindset, recovery from CPTSD as well. So let's dive right in. Let's get started. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah,
How
thanks
have
for
you
having me.
been? Of course. How have you been since the last time I spoke to you?
Honestly, pretty good. I had a blessing of having wonderful grandparents that are my in-laws, and I got to have a little reprieve and do some de-stressing and recentering for myself for a couple of days. And it set me up to get my kids back and be able to invest better in myself and them having had the little break. So it was really nice. Honestly, it happened right after I talked with you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so a real filling your own cup moment then.
Yeah, no, it was quite nice. I have a
Awesome.
very, very good blessing in my in-laws and how sweet and invested they are.
Well, it takes a village, right? As they say.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, for sure.
and you have your own little village. I mean, you have 4 kids between the age of 9 and 3. That
Yes.
is a lot to handle. So, I mean, you're working on your own healing and your own emotional regulation, and then also working, with and as a mom, being there for them and helping them through it all. So, I'm curious on what your thoughts and feelings are around emotional intelligence itself. What
Yeah.
does being emotionally intelligent mean to you?
Yeah. So, like, you can look up the definition, of course, and I'm sure it says something along the lines of understanding and being able to process and feel your own feelings and also be aware of other people's feelings, right? Like, I assume it's going to be something along those lines.
Yeah.
But the application to life, I feel like emotional intelligence is literally the beadline that connects your ability to literally go from survival to thriving based on how you apply it. Because if you're in the place of you have CPTSD or any other types of like trauma where you end up engaging with your, four F's, right? Your fawn, your flight, your um, freeze, and your fight, right? If you engage with the stressors, you're engaging with emotional intelligence to some level, right? Your body is responding even if you're not aware of it. But those are survival techniques that aren't intended for you to be applying it in the thriving way. But if you take that comprehension of, like, say you're a fawn, right? You're constantly training your brain to pay attention to everyone's tiny micro expression, but you're responding to it in a stressed way
Hmm.
versus taking that same superpower of being able to absorb and see where other people's feelings are. And instead of taking them onto you and pulling them into your own stress, if you instead see it and are able to meet someone outside of yourself, like where you don't pull that stress into you, but you are able to respond to them with empathy, but without it encompassing you. And that happens by creating space for yourself, which is a whole nother thing. But when you do that, that's where you can take that and go from surviving to just enjoying the sometimes what feels like awful. Like, I think the biggest difference between somebody who is in a crappy situation and feeling like they're barely surviving and like an endless supply of things that, like, whether it's depression or anxiety or like how it manifests can be different. But that person in that exact same situation, when they apply emotional intelligence and compassion to themselves, that situation doesn't actually have to change, but they in it can
Mm.
drastically change. And for me, my life is living proof of that. 2 years ago, my life fell apart and I was depressed and horrible. And I was a single mom. I had 4 kids. I was homeschooling. I was completely overwhelmed. Fast forward 2 years, and I was barely surviving. I'm still a single mom. I'm still homeschooling. I'm still running a business while I'm homeschooling. I Up until like 6 months ago, my in-laws didn't live here and I was by myself. Nothing had changed really 6 months ago from 2 years ago, but I changed. So I went from surviving because of my not having grace for myself and my just continuing to cope and respond to things in the same way I had been in that stress, to learning how to have space for myself, learning to apply that emotional intelligence to my life and who I am, so that I could, instead of barely surviving and keeping my head above water and feeling like I was constantly drowning, to literally just enjoying the swim,
Mm.
comparing the analogy or whatever. So for me, that's what emotional intelligence is. It's the truth that you can apply in your life as a survival where you're just like batting things away, or it's a thing that you can pull into yourself and change everything about how you are in your world, even if the external doesn't.
Yeah, I love that. That's so beautifully said. And I love the description of kind of the transition, right? From going from that first part where it's kind of like, oh, it's happening to me, to you applying the same principles, but actually looking at it from a different perspective and almost like using it as a tool to learn and to grow. And I mean, you have a lot of knowledge and understanding about this. In our pre-interview, you mentioned that you've read a lot of, psychology, you've done a lot of study in that
Yes.
field, and you use that to help you on your journey. Let's talk about CPTSD. Let's talk a little bit more about what that is,
Yeah.
what your experience was with that, because I think your personal story, if we get into your personal story a little bit, the rest is going to, the level of understanding of how actually you overcame these challenges and started to change your awareness, really open up your awareness and really become this like newer, elevated version of you. It's
Yeah.
gonna all tie in really nicely.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you can't know what somebody is or who somebody is without being able to see the transition that happened. So first off, CPTSD is literally just complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So most people know what PTSD is, right? Because of soldiers are coming back. Complex literally is just when you are in a traumatic situation that you have no escape from, it compounds and becomes very complex in how you respond to things. This can happen in a lot of different situations. Most common is childhood, because there's very few situations in your life where you are stuck like Chuck and you don't have an option, and childhood is one of them. It can also happen in really bad abusive relationships or partnerships or marriages, but the most common is in childhood. And so it's literally just if you have ever been in a traumatic situation where you didn't feel like you had any escape and you were stuck for a very long time. That's what will cause CPTSD. There's so many different books. I can actually send a link to, there's a free like rendition of a guy who just like reads a book about it that was extremely helpful for me. I own the book now, but like how I started reading it was listening to it free on YouTube because I had no money and I needed like something to help. And learning about it for me was, and the reason I went so deep into all the different like books that I read was simply because for me to comprehend it helped me to like own it. It helped me to like wrap my brain around it, because sometimes like a great example of this is gaslighting, right? If you've ever experienced gaslighting and you didn't know the term gaslighting is essentially when somebody's lying to you, but they're not just lying. It's lying to you and manipulating your brain in a way that makes you feel like you're crazy, right? And so before I knew the term gaslighting, when you say he lied or she lied, it feels so empty and so vacant. It feels so like not enough. And it makes you feel even more crazy by just saying he lied, because everybody else is like, yeah, but like, it's just a lie. But you don't like when I got the word gaslight, it was a way for me like, no, I'm not crazy. This is crazy. And it was able like, so those terms for me, not because I needed a box or that you have to be in a box, but sometimes just comprehending what you went through and knowing that it's more than just the little languages that we have, right? It's kind of like when you're teaching your kids words or you're learning vocabulary words, and you could say something's cold, right? But there's a lot difference when you're talking about it being frigid. There's more description, there's more understanding, same thing. Anyway, so my personal experience with the CPTSD is kind of extensive, unfortunately. I guess positively because I get to talk about it and help people who might have been the same thing, but I was raised really, really religiously. And that comes with its own level of trauma, because church itself it's a long trauma fest of awesome, depending on your church. The experience I was in was very religious. And so there was that. Both of my parents came from very traumatic childhoods. And as we all know, hurt people. And they did an amazing job of giving a step up from their childhood. But there was a lot of not okay. And so for me, I realized that I was alone on this world, and then I had to like the term is become parentified. I had to be my own adult for myself. That nobody else would take care of me. Definitively, the quintessential moment was I was 6 and I had gotten hurt. It was like playing outside, and it wasn't like a traumatic, like this horribly traumatic situation, but I had been hurt enough. I was bleeding pretty bad. And I walked into the tiny apartment we lived in at the time, and my mom was sitting on the couch and completely vacant. She was in the midst of having an emotional breakdown. And at 6 years old, I knew exactly that she was in that emotional breakdown. I didn't know the term emotional breakdown, but I knew she was in a bad place. And I knew why. And I thought it was reasonable. As a 6-year-old, I heard from my mom. But in that moment, I walked in and I felt so completely abandoned that I knew I was on my own. And that's just like a taste, an example. And it wasn't that my parents were awful. They did so much better than they had. But two things can be true. It can be they did the best they could. And it can also be that's just not okay. And it was. And that's what I was raised in. And there's a whole bunch of like complicated myriads where you could get into how their backgrounds and perspectives on being like the stigmas that went around. My dad was from industrial Cleveland, where there's a lot of stigmas based off of stereotypes and affluence and the impacts of all of those. You can understand the backgrounds of religious and not seen, not heard. I was definitely raised by boomers. And it all plays a part in, I knew that in order for me to handle and do life, I had to make sure that I had to protect my sister and I had to protect myself. And that if I wanted to be safe, I couldn't depend on anybody else for that. And that in order for me to do the best I could meant that I had to be perfect. So any fellow perfectionists out there, I'm with you. But of course, like most people who have so much fun in their background in their childhood, is you take those traumas, those things, those weights, and you start like pulling them into yourself. Instead of it being, I learned to fawn because I knew that if my parents were happy, that I would have less stress. I would be less likely to have bad things happen. It can be, but instead it became a thing that you pull into yourself, right? The fact that you do that and the fact that you are that are two very different things. But how we usually cope is you act shy and therefore I am shy, though it's not truth. You can both be shy and you can be bold because you take actions that are shy and actions that are bold. But when you take that onto yourself and you start seeing yourself in that perspective, you end up looking out in the world and you find that same crazy if you get married young, and I got married young. And because I never took the time to heal, I ended up just creating the same levels of trauma that I had, just in different parts of my life as it continued, whether it was friendships or marriage or anything. And it wasn't until 2 years ago, or at this point, I guess it's almost 3 years ago, I found myself alone after having been put in a place where one of the main principles, if you are raised as a perfectionist, as a fawn in a religious household, is you never, ever, ever can hurt someone, right? And I was put in a place where I had to make a choice that was going to hurt. No matter what I chose, it was going to hurt somebody. And that reality of being forced to, even if I didn't make the choice, I was hurting people. So there was no abdication. There was no, so I'm in a like no win scenario and being forced to do something that is against the very core of what I'd always been raised as. I found myself completely depressed. I was getting divorced and I never ever wanted that. I was alone for the first time in my life, never having somebody to fawn to, and didn't know what to do with myself because I just was an empty sock filled with the people around me instead of having a persona of myself. And then because of that memory, when I was 6 and feeling so completely abandoned, I never wanted to have my kids have that experience. And I found myself 3 years ago so desperately sad at everything I'd gone through and unable to quantify it in my brain that I started to become that vacancy. I started to become that shell. All I wanted to do was sleep. I was checking the boxes of being the mother of here's the food, here's the thing, I'll give you a hug. But there's a difference between a body who's in motion and a person who's there to offer connection and ability. And I was finding myself that I was becoming that vacancy. And that moment is what broke me. That's the moment quintessentially where I stood there and I was like, fuck all. This shit's not continuing. I'm not doing this to my kids. And that for me, that was literally the break where you're like, you realize like you've fallen all the way to the base and the bottom of the well. And for me, it was facing the fact that I'm about to become my worst nightmare to kids that never, ever needed that. That made me be willing to face the mirror. What's the saying? You can only heal as much as you're willing to stare in the mirror and not walk away. And that was the moment for me that I was like, okay, I don't care what's ugly. I don't care what's there. I don't care how painful this is. I'm not walking away. And it's because of that moment and because of my amazing kids, because I swear to everything, if I didn't have children, I don't know that I would have ever made that choice, because I could now, but I'm a different person now.
Mhm.
But I was so used to doing something, everything for other people. I don't know if I could have made the choice for myself. And so, as messed up as that might be, I'm glad that I was able to choose it for them, because now I can choose it for me.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing so vulnerably. And wow, there's so much in that I want to unpack. You know, the one thing that comes to mind is like, I actually just want to celebrate you and congratulate you for being, you know, the cycle breaker and the change maker in the family. Like you mentioned early on in that story, that the way your parents were raised, like they had their own trauma that came from their parents. And it really seems like there are a couple of really significant things in there and patterns of behavior that probably were generational trauma, right? And here you are, like having that line in the sand moment where you're just saying, no, you're not going to pass that on anymore. And like, that's hard. That is hard. Like, it's one thing to come to that realization, to have that awareness, and then have that moment and make that decision. And then it's a totally other thing to actually follow through and do the work. And here you are doing it. And I love, you know, like I said, I found you scrolling on Instagram. Like, I love all the things that you share. It is so vulnerable and it's so real and it's so raw. And you have this beautiful way of sharing from a place of like not being in it, but it being there, right? And you sharing from a place of like, yeah, some things I got figured out, some other things I'm kind of still working on it, but like, here's what I think and feel about it. And this is kind of what's happening right now around that thing. Right. And I think that's so beautiful. But yeah, a huge, you know, respect to you for being that person, because that is, it's a big deal, you know, it's a really big deal. And it's so interesting. We talked a little bit about this last week about the difference between the way our parents raised us versus how they were raised by their parents. And as every generation goes, it's exponential the way that parenting is changing, right? Like the way that
Mhm.
you're parenting your kids is so unlike the way your parents parented you, more unlike than how their parents parented them. And
Yeah.
I think for those reasons, it's the work that you're doing is one, a lot harder, and two, so much more important and like needed now more than ever because of that huge gap, right? That huge change. So I just, yeah, my heart goes out to you. I'm sending you so much love. Like, I honestly commend you for like being that person, because if it wasn't you, then perhaps, you know, who knows how long it continues to get passed down.
Yeah. I feel like every parent that gives uh, a couple of cents, like there are parents who don't care, right? They exist. Unfortunately, I've met people that are those parents, but as a whole, I feel like parents do the best they can. And that level of where that best they can is, that can very much change. But how I like to view it is, my parents broke the things that they could break, what they were capable of, what they were willing to face, and they did what they could do. And I'm standing on their back, and I'm trying to do what I can do. And I cannot wait. And I tell my kids on a regular basis, if you decide to have kids, you're going to be so much better of a mom, or so much better than a dad or parent than I would be, because you're going to get to learn the things that I learned, and then you're going to be able to learn more and build off of it. And that, to me, that creating each iteration where we get to learn and adjust. And yeah, I'm going to be doing something different than my parents did, both positive and negative, I'm sure. And my kids are going to probably do the same thing. But the process of it isn't being perfect, isn't having it all figured out, but it's being willing to address and look at your parenting and see the effects and call yourself into question Like, is this working? Is this helping them? Is this frustrating them? Is this, what is my trajectory? What is my focus? What is something that I want my kids to, when they're an adult, what are the foundational things? And I think for each parent, those are going to be slightly adjusted. But I definitely love the idea of building that what I have to offer is the base of where my kids get to start if they have kids. In the same way that
Yeah.
I was able to build off the base of my parents.
I love that. And I'm wondering if like that perspective and that mindset around it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, so that you're kind of not sitting there going, oh man, I've got to change all this stuff that like is a part of who I am. I've got to like flip the script for them so that they can like, launch off. And it's kind of like, it doesn't have to be so drastic, like just to have that mindset around
Yeah.
this is just like the next step. Like I'm just like the next building block and then
Yeah.
they can continue. I wonder if that like takes a little bit of the pressure and anxiety away.
Yeah, no, it does to a certain degree. So I think one of the best ways to look at it is no matter what you do, you're human. And so when you're in this world, being human, you're going to mess up, whether you have kids or you don't have kids. When you engage with any person, there is a risk of failure because you're not perfect. But when you're raising humans, it's like magnified because
Mm.
you have a tiny person who's literally watching every move you make. And they're going to mirror it back to you. So if your kids are doing something you don't like, spoilers, it's probably your behavior. So you can stop and go, oh, why does that piss me off? Oh, what is it showing me? What, like, getting curious or whatever. But I think that it definitely, when you stop trying to be perfect and you stop trying to counter parent, because I sometimes think that's what happens when you have parents that parented in a way you don't like, right? Natural instinct is to do like the pendulum swing, right? Like it's, if you had a problem with like eating Oreos, right? As somebody who has had an eating disorder, I was a person who like, you open the sleeve of Oreos and I ate the entire case, right? So my pendulum swing is I don't keep Oreos in the house because I don't trust myself with Oreos, right? But we can do that when it comes to anything, and parenting is part of that, right? So if you do this idea of I'm not going to parent how they parented, and you focus on what you don't want, spoilers, whether or not it looks the same, you're going to get the same results usually because you're staring at what you
Mm.
don't want. Versus if you say, okay, what do I want? And you may not do it perfect, but if you're focused over here being like, man, I really want my kids to know that they are loved at all times, no matter their behavior, that they can fail and I'm going to be there cheering them on. I want them to feel safe at all times. Like whatever it is, if you focus on that, your parenting may match or may not match on certain things of your past, but you're much more likely to get closer to where you want to be because you're focused on where you want to be. And I think the combination of just owning the fact that you're going to mess up and then shifting from the negative, which is what our tendency, like if you stop and you thought like, what are my five biggest strengths? Most people can't name it. But if you ask them what their five biggest weaknesses are, they'll start rattling that ish off.
Mm.
Right? The same thing
Yeah.
is true with parenting. A lot of people can say exactly what they don't want. But every time you focus on the things you don't like about yourself, the things you don't like about your parenting, the things any negative begets you focusing in on it. Just like it's a reticular activating system in your brain, right? It's like when you have a car,
Yes.
right? Okay. So you have this car you never owned before, and then you see it on the road everywhere. That is the part of your brain saying, hey, it's now important. Let's show it everywhere. It's over here, it's over there. The same way, when you focus on those negatives, all you're going to start seeing in life are those negatives, whether it's your pessimism on the thing or their behavior matching it, versus if you shift and decide, no, these things that I want, it's not the car I have right now, it's the car that I want to own. And your brain starts focusing in on that, you're going to start seeing it more. It's going to start becoming easier and you're actually going to get more towards it. But the combination of those two things for me, like just owning and saying sorry and shifting away from, I don't want that, I want this, I think were the two things that really made a big difference in me adjusting my parenting. Because as a person in the process of healing, how I parent my kids now, vastly different than 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a vastly different person with vastly different understanding about the implications of my parenting and the effects it has on their tiny brains. Like I just parented based on behavior which isn't the best factor for tiny people because
Yeah.
they can behave if they're terrified enough, right? But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that you're actually helping them long term. But yeah, so it's the owning, it's the apologizing, it's the willing to adjust behavior, like not thinking you have it figured out because we're
Yeah, and
just human.
there's a lot of there's a huge level of self-awareness in there, and I think that's something that it takes a bit of work, and it takes practice, and it takes discipline to shift your mindset, right? Like you described, it's so much we focus on the what we don't want, the ways we don't want to parent, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's so funny you said that, because what popped into my head as you said that was I don't have children. I don't intend on having children. That may change. I'm open to that, etc. But I do think that I'm probably not going to. That's what's in the forefront of my mind at the moment. However, when I'm in a restaurant or something and I see like a 2-year-old on the iPad, I'm like, I'm never going to give my kid an iPad in a restaurant. Like it's what I'm not going to do if I have these hypothetical children, or potentially have these
Yeah,
children. So it's
it's a
and
natural tendency. Like we
yeah,
even
it's
do it
so
for,
natural. We have to flip it. Like it takes work to flip it.
oh yeah, but I mean it's a natural instinct even to do it ourselves. Like think about when you have a to-do list, right? When you have a to-do list and you have 10 things on your to-do list, at the end of the day, if you got through 7 of those things on the to-do list, is your focus on the fact you got through 7 of them, or is it focused on the fact I didn't get to those 3? Most people in the world, it's the 3 you didn't do.
Yep.
It's the focus on the gap. And that's part of, I think, the biggest learning curve for me in the healing process has been the enormously human and frustrating part of unlearning that behavior. It's you can't learn and heal and grow and expect your body to like do those changes very quickly, because you're untraining what has been years of your body doing something else. But on top of that, if you're constantly standing here and looking at the gap from here to where you want to be, and all you're doing is staring at that gap, it's again focused on the thing that you're wanting, but in a negative light. Versus if you're seeing that gap and being encouraged by that gap by stopping and going, okay, but I did change this small thing. Let's take time to celebrate this small thing. It can be a tiny thing. It can literally be, I thought about writing in my journal today. You didn't do it. But the fact that you thought about it, that is bigger than before when you had never even considered writing a journal, if that's a thing you want to do. It's, I got my running shoes on. You got them on. That's good. Like the more you focus and shift from that gap, I didn't do those 3 things. You got 7 done.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
that adjustment is huge in actual practice of doing it, but it's huge in its implication for you actually being able to you want to get there, you want to get to the 10 list done, then start celebrating the 7, start celebrating the 2. You got 10, you only got 2 done, celebrate 2. Like any progress forward is something to be celebrated.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's such a good way to look at it. And it's such a simplified like analogy that it's so easy to understand. Yes, I love it. I do want to shift gears for a minute and
Oh,
talk a little bit about something that you mentioned earlier. So you said you were when you had that line in the sand moment, you were in, a really bad way. You were in a really deep depression there and becoming very vacant. I'd love to talk a little bit more about, once you made that decision that, okay, I'm here now. I'm not going to stay here. Depression, it's a heavy one, and there's different severities, there's different levels of it, and people, experience that in a different capacity. I'd love to know, from an emotional regulation standpoint, what were some of the things, and what's kind of the journey that, you brought yourself through to, not being in that deep, dark depression anymore.
yeah. So for me, there's a lot of things that have adjusted, but some of it has been comprehension. I have a thing called PMDD. Understanding that helped me. Basically what that is it's pretty common, not super, super common, but you get, when you have your cycle, right? Everybody's used to PMS. They know what that is. They know what the symptoms look like. PMDD is essentially cycling depression. It's super fun. It comes alongside your ovulation. So basically, I'm very irregular. And so I don't, every time I have a cycle, ovulate. But when I ovulate, I'm really aware of it now that I know what I have, because it is a catastrophic level of difference in my mental health. Right.
Okay.
So that exists. But separate from that, I had depression. And there's lots of different ways that people can handle it. And I think that consulting somebody who's a professional is going to be super helpful for knowing where you are and what that looks like. For me, I went about the process maybe not in the best way, but it's the way that helped me. I did therapy. But I started off with identifying one, okay, I don't want that. And I comprehended enough about the idea of I don't want that means I can't keep looking at it. Somebody once said, I think it was Tony Robbins I heard him once talk about how he took a driving course, like a NASCAR, like racing driving course. And the main thing the guy said was, you need to focus where you want to go. You're not allowed to move your head to where you don't want to go. Keep your face focused where he was. And he was telling this story about he almost got in this crash, and the driver literally like shoved his elbow on his face so he couldn't turn because he kept trying to turn to look at the wall. And he's like, if you just don't look at the wall, you won't hit the wall, right? So I'd heard that story. So in my head, I was like, okay, I need to stop focusing on, I don't want to be vacant. So what is it I want?
Mm.
Right? And I couldn't give a definition for what I wanted for myself. I literally had nothing. Not existing is what I wanted, not for myself, right? But I sat and I was like, I don't want this for my kids. So what do I want for my kids? And I was like, I want them to see adulthood as something that can be fun. I want them to see adulthood as something that they can look forward to, and that it could be a further exploration of wonder and joy and thriving and enjoyment. I wanted them to see adulthood as an extension of childhood instead of seeing it like I saw as a child. I saw it as death, death of all hope, death of all good. And I at this point actively hate the hashtag adulting because it continues that persona and that mentality on adulthood, but I don't think it actually has to be. And so I started there with, what do I want for my kids? Right. And if I want that for my kids, the only way my kids are going to live that way, have that, is if I'm living that. Because I can
Yep.
say a lot of stuff with my mouth, but as we all know, what your parents said, if it didn't match their actions, you didn't care.
Yep.
It was what they did. And so for me, I was like, all right, I've got to figure out how to enjoy life. I've got to figure out how to start thriving. I've got to figure out how to find wonder and joy when all I want to do is die. I can laugh at it now. It was not funny at the time. And so it was small stair steps. I got connected with a multi-level marketing, honestly, and it saved my life. Like, a lot of people have a lot of crap about it, and you can have your viewpoints, but for me, it connected me with a group of people who continuously encouraged me to try to invest in myself. And that's not a thing that I knew. And it wasn't just invest in myself for their business. It was self-care. It was invest in my mind. It was push myself to dream bigger. And yes, of course, it was connected to the business and all of those things. But like, that literal inundation with a completely different mindset of where my focus could be, and opened me up into my direct person who signed up with me was a person who was a similar background, had severe CPTSD. And she became a mentor in my healing journey because she would reference, hey, I read this book and it was really helpful for me because of understanding understanding the perpetuation of the trauma cycles I had as a child in my adult life. Right. And so she would give me a book, or she gave me a Brene Brown book about vulnerability and grace. And I had heard of Brene Brown before with, TED Talks or whatever, but I sat down and I read 3 of her books, and her comprehension about how to sit with feelings. Like, a lot of the times we have these things with ourselves or other people where we have this like fix it mode we get into. We have the problem. You're having a bad day and you talk to somebody about it and their automatic response is, well, did you think about this? Did you do this? Well, what about this? Isn't your life pretty good with this, this, and this? And they start like fixing it. And it just makes you more angry. It makes you more frustrated, and it makes you just want to hang up on them and scream at them a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
it escalates things versus if they sat there and they were just like, man, that sounds like a really hard day. I'm sorry. They don't have to say they felt it before. If they're just willing to sit in the uncomfortable just long enough, when it happens, your body literally starts to relax and let go of the feeling. And for me, learning about that got me curious, and it started leading me to book after book after book where I just followed my curiosity. And for me, my favorite thing about the learning journey is that it is so completely, vastly unique and different to each individual. But the best advice I can give anybody is two things. Be willing to get curious about yourself. And that means learn what you need and like and want. And that can be uncomfortable. And it's, if you're like me, very, very uncomfortable. But part of that getting curious is, in order for your life to look different, you have to be willing to get uncomfortable, because being uncomfortable is the only way your life looks different. Comfort gets you the exact same life. So sitting with yourself in that uncomfortable is a part of the process. Me learning how to self-love has been an entire arduous journey that I'm still on. But part of that self-love is being okay with the fact that, hey, Rachel, this is hard for you, and that's okay. And sitting with myself like I would another person on a bad day, and not try to fix it and not try to make it easy and not be like, well, just go buy something. Maybe that'll work. Shove a candy in it. Instead, just sit with myself in the uncomfortable and say, okay, maybe we won't have it figured out today, but we can try again. So it's getting curious about yourself and then allowing yourself to follow your curiosity wherever it might lead. I have read about silly things that don't seem to have any connection, where I got like super interested and integrated into the actual way that emotions are physical things and the science of it, gravity and its effect on the pull towards the center of the earth, and how it affects like black holes and stars and like crazy things that seem like they make no sense whatsoever. But I swear, each and every one of them, there's a reason why I had that curiosity. It connects back to something later, that is an analogy. That is a connection that my brain was able to hear something that I wasn't able to hear before. Because sometimes you can hear something 6, 7, 8, 9, 12,000 times, but it takes you being in a different place for you to hear it and actually receive it. And sometimes it takes you comprehending something else. And so getting curious about yourself and following it was huge for me. It was a part of that was self-compassion in it. And the inner bully, a lot of times people like to do this thing. Ed Milet is an amazing man. From everything I know of him, his podcasts have been extremely helpful for me. But he had a podcast recently where he was talking about how we get stuck in the past, which I completely agree. And the nostalgia of that actually traps us often. But he said one thing that I don't agree with. And I've heard lots of people do this. And I understand it because there's a level that it takes effect and it's an immediate response. But he said, name the dummy, when he was talking about the inner critic, right? That person in your head who's telling you can't do this or giving you excuses. And the reason he says name the dummy is if you sit there and identify that that thing is a parrot in your head, you can train that parrot to say anything. If a parrot turned to you and said, grab that Snickers bar, that's a car, you're not going to take any weight to it because you know it's just repeating phrases. The bully in your head is just repeating phrases. It doesn't make them true. It doesn't make them real. And you disconnecting that statement as, hey, this is just because I thought it doesn't mean it's true. Just because I thought it doesn't have weight. That I agree with. But when you say name the dummy and you mock that part of your brain, you actually are leaving part of yourself holding that truth. lack of truth, honestly. You leave yourself, you abandon that person, that part of you who's repeating it. And there's a whole science of interfamily medicines you can look into, but the baseline of it is that our body and our mind reacts almost like a family unit in our brain, right? And when we're in a traumatic situation, sometimes parts of our brains take up mantles that they never wanted to have. The inner bully, scientifically through the like experience of other people healing their systems, almost exclusively wants to encourage you, but it's doing the exact opposite.
Mm.
And when I sat with mine and I said, okay, please stop because I can't, and you're really mean, instead of like making fun of it or dismissing it, if I just sat and I said, okay, listen, I get that you're trying to say the things first, because maybe if you say them first, it won't hurt as much when somebody else says them. You're trying to protect me, and I get it. This isn't needed now. I'm not in that situation where I have these people repeating it back to me. I am on my own, and I need you to stop being that bully. You've taken up the mantle. You've started saying these things, and I know that's not what you want. And it sounds crazy to have these conversations with yourself, but doing that, and I did mine with my therapist, I don't have to fight that inner bully anymore. It happens when I'm in my PMDD sometimes, but as a whole, that person now is more like a, well, what if?
Mm.
And you can flip the script instead of leaving part of yourself abandoned with the person who's mocked, because you're like, when you do that, you're literally shunning you. And it's usually a really hurt part of you that's stuck in this, thinking they're still in this traumatic situation where they have to lash out. And so I respectfully, with complete humility, say, maybe compassion instead of mocking. Maybe sit with it and say, hey, this isn't true. I don't need to hear that. Let's try something else. For me personally, that was a very big shift.
Beautiful. It really was, an act of like making peace with that part of you.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
Hearing
Because
it
I mean,
and making peace with it. Yeah.
yeah.
What were you going to say, sorry?
I was gonna say, yeah, no, it's definitely a part. It's kind of like, it's like, so most people, when you think back to your childhood, you can only think of like really extreme situations, right? Like the first time you rode a roller coaster, and when you fell out of a tree, right? You have these extreme memories because how your brain works, it only has so much RAM space to take up, like, and take in. So it clears out all the middle, all the like day-to-day stuff that wasn't big. But unfortunately for a lot of people, the things that it stores are a lot of negatives. And when it stores it, it isn't just storing it like it's an allegorical like wisp in the air. It's an actual physical part of who you are. And there is a very real part of you that is stuck in that moment that was founded.
Mm-hmm.
And so for it really is making peace with a part of you. It really is coming to the table and saying, hey, like you would a friend. And you're like, I get that you're dating this guy. And I get that you don't understand why he's treating you that way. But have you stopped to ask why you keep receiving it? Right? You stop and have that patience with a friend,
Mm-hmm.
but it's applying that patience with yourself and having those conversations with a part of yourself, because we're not always aware of everything at the same time. And so it can sound crazy, but it's simply parts of your awareness that are present and other parts that aren't.
I love that best friend analogy. I actually learned something, along those lines quite a long time ago, and I have applied it in my life since then. And it's simply that. It's that voice in your head. If you kind of stop for a second and go, hang on, the way that I'm talking to myself right now, would I speak that way to my best friend? Can
Mm-hmm.
guarantee the answer is no. And if you can just kind of remember that and recycle that thought from time to time, I feel like that process, although uncomfortable and sticky and icky in the beginning, like you said, really being in that uncomfort zone of it. It's the
Yeah.
only way that you that it gets to be easier and you get to
Yeah.
keep practicing it. But that's a really good reminder. Like, would I say this to my best friend? Or if my best friend said this to me, how would I feel? You can
Yeah.
kind of go both ways.
No, exactly. I actually say to my oldest on a regular basis, make sure you're talking to yourself how you'd want to have somebody talk to your sister. And
Mm.
because it is very true. Like it is a test case. Like when you start having a thought, to stop and ask that question to yourself. And if you're not, then say, okay, we're going to adjust. How can I say this in a different way? Because people get like really mad at self-love. Or there's this, I've heard a couple different podcasts where people talk about like self-love as this, they like are hating on it because self-love has different applications about how people take it onto themselves. For me, what I comprehend about self-love and self-acceptance are two vastly different things. And what I mean by that is self-love is like I love my kids. They don't have a reason. If you ask me why I love my kids, I'd be like, because they're my kids. They didn't come out dropping golden eggs. They didn't come out pristine angels. They didn't come out having something to offer me. They innately, because they breathe, I love them. Whether they mess up, they're awesome, or otherwise, I love them. If you have a person in your life, whether it's a sibling or a small person or a spouse, you have that same thing. You have somebody in your life where you just, it doesn't matter what happens, you love them. Now, applying that to yourself, no matter what I do, I'm going to love myself. Now, that isn't the same as self-acceptance. In the same way that if you have a spouse, a partner, a child, and they do something that's outright mean, you don't just go, "Come here, sweet, I should love it." No, you call it out and you say, that's
Mm-hmm.
not okay. You just talked to me in a way that was completely disrespectful, and I'm not okay with that. It doesn't adjust how much you love them, but it does adjust how your proximity is and how you respond to them.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes people convolute self-love with self-acceptance, because I can fully and completely love myself right here. But that doesn't mean I don't have things I want to change. That doesn't have, and me wanting to change something about myself doesn't mean that I hate myself. It means that I'm like, hey, I'm calling myself to a higher level.
Mm.
I love myself right here, but I'm done with talking to myself like I wouldn't my best friend. I'm done with not showing up for myself and being active. Like I keep saying it, but I keep breaking that promise. I'm not going on that walk that I said I was going to. I love myself, but I just went to the store and bought a thing of Oreos and ate the whole thing. I don't like that, right? And I think that's the disconnect sometimes, that people think of self-love like it means you have to fully embrace every part of who is that true for? Who
Yeah.
in your life have you ever loved where you're like every minute, like every time they hit me or they like talking mean towards me or that chewing with their mouth open, I love it. No, there's always something where you're like, I love them. I find that annoying, but I love them.
Mm-hmm.
And that same thing can be true with yourself. And I think that that's why self-love can get a bad name, because of the two sides of it. The people who are coming and looking at it like, no, you should change, like you should improve. Yes, but also you can be okay where you are right now. It can be both.
Mm-hmm.
And then people on the other side who are like, but I'm just loving myself where I am. Yeah, but you can also call yourself to grow. You can also
Yeah.
call yourself to become more. And like you were talking about the uncomfortable, something that happened in the process of me healing was my new comfort zone is discomfort. And that sounds weird or bad when you haven't been in discomfort. It sounds like, why would you want that?
Mm-hmm.
But now it's the safe zone. I know that if I'm continuously in small ways making myself uncomfortable, I know that I'm not going to ever stagnate or go backwards. And so it is now a safe place where I'm like, okay, I'm uncomfortable with this. I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, isn't that really like the truest, form of self-love, the truest act of self-love anyway, is just continually like loving for who we are and who we see ourselves as and all the flaws. And then, like you said, holding it to a higher standard and being like, well, I love you, but hey, we can be better. We can we can make those weaknesses strengths, and we can make our strengths even stronger. Like, why not? Let's go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And acknowledging the process as you go. It's kind of like when you work out at the gym, right? You might have goals when it comes to how much you can lift, or that you have this number of abs, or that you are able to run for this length of time. But the same process, you're not going to see the results like immediately, right? And it's going to be uncomfortable when you start the process of whatever exercise you're starting. But part of getting through the muck, the like super uncomfortable, like that you're doing leg days and you can't walk down those stairs, so you're just kind of scooping your butt, is the ability to, one, keep your eye on where you're wanting to go, right? Through the pain, through the frustration, through the discomfort. But on top of that, it makes it easier when you start acknowledging, okay, my legs hurt, but that's a good hurt. My legs hurt, and I did a great job yesterday working out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, high five old self me for loving me now, even if I don't like the results of it right this second. And it's acknowledging the process while you're in it. And that's the magic. Because I think a lot of times we have this viewpoint of like when I got started, literal conversation with my therapist where I was like, okay, I'm very type A, point in case of me reading all the books. I literally sat down and I was like, okay, so here's the deal. I can already tell you these 16 different things that are wrong with me. And we're going to work on them. And these are the top priority, these top 4, because they're the most affecting of my life. And I feel like they're going to take this long for each one of them, right? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go really intense. Visualize we're in a storm. Okay. I'm on the boat. You're helping me steer the boat. And we have 2 options. I've been skirting this storm, and I'm done skirting the storm. My boat keeps about sinking. So we're just going to turn full-fledged directly into the heart of the storm so I can cut through this mother trucker and get to the other side and be done. And she was very kind, and she was like, okay, well, let's just start with turning the boat and we'll go from there. I didn't have the kindness in her heart to say, oh, love, the storm is your life and it doesn't stop. So it's about learning how to exist in the storm instead of fighting it. That's the thing. But instead, she was just like, okay, we're just going to let you pretend like there's the other side that happens. She just like let it to this day, sweetest woman in the entire world. But that's like the visual of it, is like we have this like fight, this like, ah, I'm gonna like will my way out of a bad day. I'm gonna will my way out into healed. And we have this perspective of arrival, like it's a hike and we're getting to the top. If you analogize your life like a hike and you're trying to get to healed, when you get to healed, 2 things are going to happen. One of 2 things. One, you're then going to be like, oh man, I've already arrived. I guess I'm just downhill from here, right? Or the other is you're going to be like, I made it here, but now that I'm here, I see there's like a way bigger mountain. Guess I'm climbing that one. Like, you have 2 perspectives on what it is.
Yeah.
But it's about the process of, instead of constant, like, do you know how defeating that is? If you are either side, like if you get to the top and you're like, oh, I guess I just go downhill, that's defeating. Or if you're there and then you're like, man, I have a whole nother one of these things, and you're just focused on the top of the next one. Either
Mm-hmm.
side of that's defeating, versus if you instead, you're like, okay, what's that tree on this path? That's really interesting. I just heard a bird. I've never heard that one before. If you stop and you just start enjoying the pain and the good and the pretty along the process, you're going to remember the hike more. You're going to have a lot more fun on the hike. And even if you don't get exactly where you thought you should be getting, maybe you found a different path that was better for you and you have a better view then. Like, and it's that shift is huge for one, that like, I think especially in the United States, but like everywhere has this like grind until you die, like this
Mm.
vibe about healing, about relationships, about work, about everything. They have these jokes about like people where they're like, we just survive until tonight. We just have another day, another 4 days, and then just another week. And they have this like perspective of, they're like, if I just survive now, and then they stack it onto like surviving all of this. If we just shift it from, instead of surviving, I am going to, whatever it is I can today, enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stop and be like, okay, well, I got into a car accident, and that wasn't great. But you know what? I got outside and I heard some birds and it helped me calm. That's a good thing. I liked the birds. That was nice. And it's hard. And you have to retrain your brain in the same way that you have to retrain from focusing on what I don't want into, okay, I'm going to start just enjoying today and being. Like that is the biggest journey and learning lesson of my life. I'm calling it currently.
Yeah, the stillness, right? Like just embracing the
Yeah.
stillness and just being, letting it be, like simply letting it be. Oh,
Yeah.
there's so much value in this conversation. I feel like we could talk for hours. Information really is power, and I feel like you have shared so much information with us in this conversation. I appreciate you so much. I feel like there's a couple of things I just want to like really quickly point to and just highlight. I think a running theme in all the kind of stories and shares and perspectives that you spoke with us about today, you know, changing your focus, I think is a
Huge.
definite, you know, pattern going on there, that like instead of focusing on the gap, like look at what we've accomplished, really just, you know, being present with all that is and not trying to like force our way through and like get to the end, and you know, finding the joy in things, really just finding that childlike joy in everyday, you know, activities and existing. um but definitely, you know, it really does come down to focus. It's like you described in the beginning, you know, having the emotional intelligence. It's kind of like making that shift between, okay, so all these things are happening and I'm either like, ah, like in the chaos of it all, or it's kind of like, oh, okay, or I could look at these things and have awareness around it and go, okay, well, what is this kind of trying to teach me and how can I move through this with grace? And, you know, it's like that, all that is really is, like you said, you know, the circumstance is the same, and
Yeah.
it's really in about how you deal with it.
Yeah. I think healing ultimately comes down to a perspective change, but the main key one in my head is instead of trying to see yourself as broken and healing yourself, the process of healing is coming into who you are.
Mm,
It's putting off the coping mechanisms that you dealt with and had to do to survive. And it's becoming more connected with I am this, what are my innate strengths? What are the things that I'm really good at? And fully embracing who you are, because when you do that, when you start really just taking off the backpack that you put on because you had to, and you start just being you, the entire process becomes a lot less. I think you could just even leave it with less. It becomes a lot less.
mm,
It's just the weight of needing to know and needing to, you have a lot of the answers just being you.
mm. That's beautiful. I love that. I love that so much. And I think just remembering too that, you know, we talked a lot about like comfort zone and how you mentioned your kind of your normal, your kind of happy place is like being outside your comfort zone. And I think like one thing I just wanted to highlight there is that, you know, I think sometimes people, that obviously freaks people out because, you know, the word itself, comfort. Okay, well, I want to be comfortable. Like I don't want to be uncomfortable. I don't want to be outside my comfort zone. I think sometimes that gets confused with, you know, your comfort zone and like being safe. Like you can be outside your comfort zone and you're okay. Like you're not gonna die. Like you're still safe, right? And I think
Yeah.
that takes a little bit of work to kind of almost like train our nervous system to know that like, hey, we're having this new experience and it feels weird, but like we're okay here. Like we are
Hmm.
good.
Yeah. I think part of the process is learning. Sometimes we view a place as safe, right?
Mm,
We have our home is safe, or this environment is safe. What the process is of getting, like when you start getting to know yourself, when you start healing, when you start becoming more you, is you realize that you are the safe.
mm,
You bring that with you wherever you are, that you can be in this stressful environment. And I do this exercise because I have a really hard time with not pulling people's feelings into myself, right? Um, it's just the visualization of putting myself within a bubble, right? And then I stand inside the bubble and then I paint inside of it with this like lacquer. So it's a very strong bubble. And I have a code word that I say. And it just reminds me when I'm in a situation and I start not doing that, my daughter knows what my code word is. So she can say it to me. And I say, I have a code word for her to do the same because she has the same problem. Shocking that my daughter has the same problems I have, poor girl. But it's learning how to create that safety wherever you are because you are your safety. You're your ride or die. Literally, you're stuck with you for the rest of time.
Mm-hmm.
So start prioritizing you. Like people have this term selfish because they think of the definition of like choosing my own good at the cost of someone else. And I wish there was an alternative word that existed in English that meant something different, that meant taking care of yourself. And it doesn't have to be at the cost of someone else because that is necessary for being able to feel safe. The reason you might feel safe in an environment is somebody else is putting your priorities first. So your body's like, oh, I don't have to think about like almost dying here. Awesome.
Yes. Very well said. I do want to ask you, just because you've read so many books, I'd love to ask if you have any recommended books you'd like to share with us before we kind of move on to any final thoughts. Because obviously there's been a lot, and if there's any that
Yeah.
come to mind that you think would be helpful to the audience
Oh,
based
gosh.
on or in relation to, some or all of the things that we've talked about today. You mentioned Brene Brown.
Yeah. So Brene
Perhaps there
Brown's got a
was, sorry, go ahead.
You're fine. So like Brene Brown's got a lot of different books. The Power of Vulnerability is I listened to it on an audiobook, but it's a conversation she has with a group of people where they go back and forth about ideas. And that was extremely powerful for me.
Mm-hmm.
But not immediately like starting off in my healing journey. There's a book called CPTSD. It's literally a part of the title, and then it says like the surviving guide or something like that. I'll have to send you the author afterwards because I can't remember his name right now.
Sure.
Um, but that book was extremely powerful for me in healing with my CPTSD. Um, let's see. Oh gosh. Um, there's a book by a Franciscan monk that I read so many different times. I don't like religion, but I definitely believe in God. And this particular book is going through and talking, it's the furious longing of God. And it goes through and it talks about how you don't have to do and be like essentially what we do with our kids, what we do with the people we love, where you love them no matter what they are and you accept them where they are. And you might challenge them to grow in certain areas, but you accept them and love them where they are. And it goes through and points out and talks through how that's how God views us. These different people and how they view things and how they decide to tell you what you can and cannot do has nothing to do with God. It has to do with them and boxes and control and lack of faith, honestly, because the opposite of faith isn't doubt, it's control.
Mm.
Um, but so those are three books that were extremely powerful for me along my healing journey. Um, there's been so many different books that like the Miracle Morning was really helpful for me in helping know exactly what things are beneficial for me to do in a morning, right? Because like psychologically, there are implications about if you wake up in the morning when you're really sleepy, there's literal so much science that I now know about if you say affirmations, then you're in this wavelength in your brain when you first wake up, like barely woke up. If you can recall right then to say something like, you're beautiful, you're awesome, you are so smart, and I cannot wait to see what you do with today. Like any type of positivity that you can say to yourself when you first wake up, your brain is in a place that it's completely mushy, is a good way to describe it, where you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
I'll take that in. That's truth. And it's like so much more powerful than if you try to do it later when your brain's now like in executive mode where it's like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this.
Mm.
So Miracle Morning was really helpful with knowing like, okay, when you wake up first thing in the morning and you exercise, you're literally setting your dopamine, your happy brain chemicals, to be higher for the rest of your day,
Mm.
right? Anyway, so there's science books that like affected so much about what I do. But the ones that really affected my heart and being able to have compassion and sit with myself and be able to just be would be the Brene Brown Power of Vulnerability, the Fierce Longing of God. And I can't remember his name, but I know he's a Franciscan monk. and then the CPTSD book. Those were three that were really helpful for me on my journey. Would not suggest anybody who listens to the CPTSD book, please don't continue after you get triggered. A lot of times, if you're anything like me, you want to power through. There's a level of tolerance, especially if you are a CPTSD recovery. And if you get outside of that tolerance and you start feeling really dysregulated, you cannot absorb that information, you cannot heal, and it's actually going to make you much worse. So if you get to a place when you're reading this book, for me, it was literally somewhere between 90 seconds and 4 minutes, I'd have to pause. It took me forever to get through this book because I got triggered so much through so much what it had to say, but it's worth stopping. It's worth calming your body down, and it's worth pausing. For me, it could affect my mood for days and find other things that uplift you. So Ed Milet's been huge in giving me positive things to consider and adjust how I view, because I don't agree with necessarily everything that's on there, but it's very helpful for me to hear something different, encourage me. But again, I feel like it's getting curious about what it is. What do you have interest in? And then find, like, Google it, ask somebody in a different group, because you have those curiosities for a reason. Dive in and find out why.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. This has been such an incredible conversation. Rachel, love it. Oh my goodness. Thank you so, so much. I have like goosebumps actually. Like that was just like so powerful. I know everyone listening has gotten so much value from this. Where can people find you if they want more of of you?
Yeah, totally. So I'm on everything for social media, but I'm actually launching a podcast called In the Nude. It's the naked truth of healing. So it's going to be me talking about the raw, because it's not pretty, the process. It's really ugly, and a lot of times people have these cookie cutter views, and it's going to be talking about that it's murky and the real process that I have gone through. So you can find me there anywhere podcasts are, but Healing Rachel Abbey. Abby spelled ABI because that's the only weird part of my name. But I'm everywhere. I'm on every platform. And if you have any problems or questions about something specific, my DMs are open. If I don't get to you, message me again, because I do get requests. And sometimes don't get to them because I don't see them.
All right. Amazing. Any final thoughts?
Give yourself compassion along the process. That's the biggest thing. Sometimes I feel like people have this viewpoint: if you beat yourself up, it'll go better, or it's habit. There's a cute line I heard once where if beating yourself up would have worked, it would have worked by now. But even more so is the quickest way for you to let go of a feeling, move past something, to help somebody else do the same thing, isn't having a solution, isn't having a pretty box, isn't having the to-do list. It isn't any of those like particular things that we really think would be really pretty and nice and clean. It's compassion. It's grace. It's being willing to sit in the uncomfortable. And if you can learn to start the process wherever it is you are and build on it, it becomes more natural. But that has been by far the thing that has helped me the most in actually moving through and moving past difficult triggers and difficulties in the healing.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on. It was lovely to have a conversation with you.
Great. Okay, I'm just gonna stop recording. Stop.